Ladies and gentlemen, let's for Gaming Silicon video. Let us discuss Killzone Shadow Fall on the PS4 versus Killzone 3 on the PS3, and this is going to serve as a technical analysis and graphical analysis, and this is going to be part 1 of the series, during which we're going to show off how the PS4's development was so much easier, how the team at Guerrilla so easily surpassed their work with the PS3, and just how much potential the PlayStation 4's architecture truly has. It also is going to show off some really cool stuff as well. So I've also written a ridiculously lengthy article to coincide with this, and you can check it out in the description, in which you'll have found a ridiculous amount of resources and links that I've used, and also a link to download a short but very high quality bitrate video, which is going to serve as a very good graphical comparison as well. It's shorter, but it's very high bitrate quality, so you don't have to deal with YouTube compression. So with Killzone 3, the team at Guerrilla really pretty much pushed the PlayStation 3 to its absolute limits. They reduced the input latency that plagued Killzone 2. They vastly optimized their usage of memory using texture streaming, and also increased the usage of the SPUs, synergistic processing units, from the 60% that they estimated with KZ2 all the way up to about 100%. Now the PS3 was actually pretty limited in terms of memory. Not only did it only have 512 megabytes, not taking into account the operating system overheads by the way, but it was also pretty limited in terms of memory bandwidth. The cell processor, for example, had about 25 gigabytes per second, and the GPU had about the same, using GDDR3 memory. So because of that, the team had to orchestrate the levels and the texture streaming technologies and even the sounds to load up as it was required. So for example, you would enter a zone, let's call it zone A, the game would start loading zone B in the background, you would go to zone B, it would dump the data from zone B and would start loading the data from zone C, and it would continue to do that. Textures were a huge problem as well, and they would eat up such large amounts of memory, 50% or more, that Guerrilla had to eventually go to high quality MIP map chains and only stream those in when required. And 95% of the sounds were actually streamed from the hard disk rather than the traditional memory in the system. Meanwhile, these concerns for the most part weren't part of the PlayStation 4. They had 8 gigabytes of unified memory, which, even if you take into account the reserved memory, was still around a dozen times more than the PlayStation 3. That gives you an idea of just how much memory was available. In addition, not only was it unified, which allowed ease of use for Guerrilla in terms of compute, but it also meant that they could much easier to allocate resources however they needed it. For example, the demo they showed in January of 2013 had about 1500 megabytes of data just on the main system. That, by the way, is 3 times larger than the PlayStation 3's entire system memory. And this figure actually grew as the game got to release stage. Now, we do know that the PS4 has 176 gigabytes of memory bandwidth, but about 172 is usable. Once again, all of these references are in the article, so you can check those out. Naughty and Guerrilla both heavily used the SPUs inside the PS3. With the SPUs in the PS3 with Killzone 3, they actually used it for a variety of different things, for example object culling, and they also used it for morphological anti-aliasing. Naughty Dog also used the SPUs, as I mentioned earlier, even for the original Uncharted, including for lighting calculations. Now, each of the SPUs has its own 256 kilobytes of local memory and requires direct memory access to access external memory, but they best operate with contiguous data chunks and aren't really good in out of order operations at all. In fact, they're in order processors, just like the PS3's cell. With the PS4, none of this is true. It of course uses the GCN architecture, or rather a beefed up version of the GCN architecture, and actually features 8 Ace engines, each capable of 8 queues, meaning 64 total. The major issue with the SPUs of the PS3 is it required a very good compiler. In fact, Naughty Dog themselves actually complained about it and had to work really hard to produce a better one. Now, the GCN architecture is itself an in-order processor, but due to the fact it has a much better memory architecture, better instruction set, better technology overall in terms of implementation, and with technologies such as volatile bit, and with an excellent queue structure, it's a lot easier for it to pick and choose the jobs that it's actually required to run. Finally, Killzone Shadow Fall only uses GPU compute for a few things. One is memory defragmentation, in other words for texture streaming. Another is for color correction, and the final one is force fields, which basically are to calculate things such as explosions and, forces applied to different objects. What we do know is that the PS4 does not currently use this, or shall I say, Shadowfall does not use it for AI. Therefore, there's a limit of 24 AIs. And any more than that and you start getting frame rate issues. What we do know is that these are all run on the CPU, which of course is PS4's AMD Jaguar. There are 6 threads available to the game, and one of those cores 0x is the orchestrator, which pretty much tells all the others what to do. With this main CPU, the Jaguar, it runs at, we think, at 1.6 GHz, which means it has about 102 G-flops of computing power across all 8 cores. And Guerrilla have stated that the PS4 is much more efficient at running code. This is due to several reasons, including the fact that it's much better at running jobs. For example, they managed to get 10 to 80, that is 10% on KZ3 to 80% on Shadowfall for game logic jobified. And just with high level optimizations alone, they managed to gain about 50% of this PS4's CPU utilization back. Killzone 3 was actually rendered at 720p, locked at 30 frames per second, and uses deferred lighting. And as we discussed earlier, anti-aliasing is taken care of using the morphological anti-aliasing running on the SPUs. Now, this technology is considerably more efficient than what they were using for Killzone 2, which was pretty much being rendered internally at 2560 by 720, and then that's downsampled to the target resolution of 1280 by 720. So effectively it was rendered twice and was 30% more expensive than KZ3. Meanwhile, for Shadowfall, initially they were only using FXAA, or Fast Approximate Anti-Aliasing, with a target resolution of 1080p and 30 frames per second. Now, FXAA was originally created via NVIDIA and is very low cost in terms of performance. By the way, in the article there are some comparison screenshots, so you can check those out. But Mikel VD Lowell mentioned on Twitter that now they're using FXAA and TMAA, but multi-sampling just didn't make the cut because it was too costly. So now they're using TSSAA, or Temporal Super Sampling Anti-Aliasing, which basically uses the previous frame of animation as a reference point and then basically saves the GPU from having to calculate all of that all over again. It's cheaper than, say, MSAA, but it still has some issues with shimmering. You'll notice it particularly on chain link fences and other fine details and textures maybe in the background. I'm unsure if it was too costly in terms of memory bandwidth or possibly GPU utilization. Obviously, the frame rate in Killzone Shadowfall does fluctuate a little bit. It's unlocked, so it can go from under 30 frames per second, which obviously is not ideal, to the mid 40s-ish, really depending on what you're doing. I'm going to be doing some more internal testing myself over the next couple of days. Anyway, that's it for part 1. As I said, check out the article and you'll have the link for the high resolution images as well. High resolution video, plus tons and tons of references, so you can check those out and let me know what you think. Anyway, I'm going to get going. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.